Before the 1972 Olympics in Munich, Cuba was hardly known, in a sporting context at least. Many around the world deemed it little more than a rebellious communist outpost pitted precariously close to the world's largest superpower and a behemoth of capitalism. Fidel Castro had defied the odds in overthrowing Fulgencio Batista and resisted enormous US pressure to fall in line. But now the island of just 9 million people would truly exceed expectations in the sport world. First off, Cuba's Orlando Martinez secured gold in the bantamweight category, then Emilio Correa won gold in the welterweight. Yet, most memorably, a new star was born in the form of 6'5" heavyweight Teofilo Stevenson, who convincingly beat the Romanian challenger. Cuba would end the 72 Olympic Games with the best boxing medal haul, 3 golds, 1 silver and 1 bronze. But the best was yet to come. At the 1980 Olympics in the USSR, Cuban boxers would win 6 gold medals, 2 silvers and 2 bronzes. Some may point to the US boycott as having lowered the bar to win, but 4 of the Cuban gold winners faced Soviet fighters in their respective finals, making the victories all the more impressive in my eyes. But where on earth did this generation of Cuban killers spawn from? And how have they maintained this impressive Olympic record over time, amassing the second most medals ever? In all honesty, whenever seeing Cuban boxers at the Olympics, I always view them like mystical warriors who we have to appreciate for the fleeting time they're on screen. After all, aside from Cuban defectors, we've effectively never seen Cuban boxers in the pro ranks, at least since Castro's ban in 1961. And sadly, I'm not hardcore enough to religiously watch amateur boxing competitions.
How dare you!
Anyway, their style of footwork combined with skillful counterpunching has served to bamboozle opponents for decades. But one thing that can be overlooked is the inherent intimidation factor.
There's an aura about the Cuban team. Everyone wants to avoid them, but and that can get to a certain individual, I think. If you're not strong-minded, strong-willed, then you can certainly let your emotions get the better of you, and I've seen a lot of fighters beaten before they get into the ring against the Cubans.
In this video, I want to explore the behind the scenes of how Cuba quickly developed into an amateur boxing giant. Please consider liking and subscribing. Now, let's get into this. With boxing largely taking off in Cuba just after the Jack Johnson against Jess Willard fight on the 5th of April 1915, the country began to produce some notable fighters. Its first boxing world champion was Kid Chocolate. Then came fighters like Kid Gavilan, Benny Parrott, Luis Manuel Rodriguez, Sugar Ramos and Jose Napolez. There was therefore an evident natural affinity to the sport, a solid foundation, but a system would need to be implemented to garner the best possible results. After Castro's revolution in 1959, in an attempt to bolster world communism's image, the Soviet Union sent experienced boxing coaches Andrei Chervenenko and Viktor Bistrov to help develop Cuban fighters. Alongside legendary coach Alcides Segarra, who headed Cuban boxing since 1960, the newly assembled team built a national recruiting and training program based on the Soviet model. If you're unfamiliar with the Soviet boxing training, which was renowned for being highly tough and demanding, then please check out the video I made on the Soviet Olympic boxers' domination of the US, link will be down below. Anyway, the tough Soviet training began to be implemented, partly I feel out of necessity, as when examining the Cuban and USSR boxing styles, although distinct, both rely on a constant pendulum step-like movement. Sustaining this bounce from the elasticity in your legs is obviously very taxing over multiple rounds, so conditioning is important. Secondly though, the Soviets were looking to cultivate the resilience in Cuba's boxers, which was often characteristic of those in the USSR. Tough training meant tougher fighters, and why not instill these principles early? Let's say around 12.
Santos is finding it difficult to keep up with the punishing training regime.
From the age of 12, talented youths began to be sent to specialized schools where they would train in advanced boxing drills and exercises. The biggest prospects would be sent to train at La Finca Gym in Havana, where they would be molded into boxing machines. John Duncan's book, In the Red Corner, details the routine of Angel Espinosa, a talented boxer from the 80s. There was no public transport from central Havana to Finca, and Espinosa usually cycled 10 or so miles to the gym. If the bike wasn't working, he ran it. His landlady's son used to wake him up at 4 AM and pull him out of bed to get out to Finca in time. Nothing is and ever was handed to these boxers. Akin to the Soviet mindset, Cuban boxers were consistently compelled to prioritize the collective over themselves.
Porque tiene una ideología, los boxeadores nuestros, su gran mayoría, ha habido algunos desertores, pero por supuesto no es la regla, es la excepción. Boxeador salido de acá, o sea que ha habido boxeadores de esta nueva jornada de boxeadores cubanos que han llegado al profesionalismo.
Whereas in the West we see pro boxers chasing fame and fortune, Cubans are simply wired differently from the start.
Eso no tiene nada de importancia lo que es el dinero ni la economía que pueda uno obtener. Pienso que sí, que lo primero que uno debe tener es el cariño y el amor a lo que uno hace.
Instead of fighting for massive purses and drawing motivation from material gain, Cuban boxers were compelled to stay at amateur level. They therefore had to draw motivation from other avenues, such as the love of the sport, gaining the respect of the people, and making Castro and the country proud of them. The will of the greatest is unshakable. After all, Teofilo Stevenson famously noted that the love of 11 million Cubans was worth more than $1 million, whilst Don King allegedly offered Felix Savant 10 million in Mexico to turn pro. Although the boxers would be rewarded with a house and a car for any international success they achieved, they ultimately remained skint. Additionally, some fighters were made to take serious risks. For example, Duncan points to Angel Espinosa, who was effectively forced by coaches to move up to light middleweight, stating that he therefore had to train twice as hard and eat twice as much. He was suddenly forced to brawl with bigger, more powerful guys within a short time period, and he had to adapt to added danger with only the love of the sport to motivate him. We have historically seen how gluttony derails boxing careers. Roberto Duran, Andy Ruiz, and even Kid Chocolate succumbed to major overeating. Cuba's solution? Lay down a brutal dietary regime early doors.
10-year-old Cristian Martinez attends the Havana Boxing Academy with many of the country's best young boxers. They live in 6 days a week under a strict regime of 4 hours daily training combined with a diet that leaves them perpetually hungry. To stay within their division, the boys must adhere to a strict diet. 3 times a day, Bonachea checks their weight.
By instilling these habits from such an early age, I feel Cuban boxers become disciplined, accustomed to regulation, and I feel this partly explains the number of multi-medal boxing champions the country possesses. Whether that be Felix Savant, Angel Herrera, or Teofilo Stevenson, Cubans also have a tendency to slim down into their weight category, meaning they effectively squeeze their power into lighter weight classes, gaining an inherent advantage. The brutality was not solely consigned to the training or system, it also extended to drastically reducing opportunities for Cuban boxers. Cuba boycotted the 1984 and 1988 Olympics in Los Angeles and Seoul, leaving many of its fighters utterly devastated. Savant suffered greatly, missing out on the 1988 Olympics and, as he admitted, the medal he so desperately craved. But this stoked a fire in Savant, which I believe pushed him on to win gold medals at the 92, 96 and 2000 games. He, as well as many other Cuban boxers, knew the chance to fight could be taken away from him, so he boxed as though every bout were his last. With every video I make on boxing in communist countries, I inevitably have to address the steroid topic. The close links to the Soviet Union and the advances in Cuban sport coming under the influence of East German sports advisors who regularly administered drugs to their own athletes makes it a definite possibility. As Duncan notes in his book, the physical dominance of Cuban boxers is clear at most tournaments, with the Cubans enjoying height and reach advantages due to them having no fat where it isn't needed. There have been previous examples, but it's impossible to attribute all Cubans' success to such measures. Having trawled across the internet, there's a distinct lack of information regarding the Cuban boxing regime. Much surrounding the country seems controlled and secretive. Admittedly, the Cuban system has revealed some potential cracks as of late, securing only 1 gold medal and 1 bronze in Paris 2024. But they did win the most in the 2020 Olympics, so this could perhaps be just an anomaly. Nevertheless, it's undeniable that the regimented, brutal parameters put in place by the Cuban government and coaches have nurtured young talent and set them up for glory.
I would think they would have a certain amount of success in the professional game, without a shadow of doubt. Because of the style of boxing that they have, you could train a Mario Kindling to box over 12 rounds. The way he's relaxed and he doesn't get tired, I bet you he could do 12 rounds in his sleep.
The crux of John Duncan's book was a retelling of his attempt to organise a professional style bout between Felix Savon and Mike Tyson. He was inspired by the proposed matchup between Teofilo Stevenson and Muhammad Ali, which failed to come to fruition.
He was offered a fight with Muhammad Ali. It was made. It was, at the time, the sport's greatest pairing. Ali against Stevenson for millions.
Pero eso hubiese sido una pelea que la hubiese querido ver todo el mundo. Lo que uno tenía un concepto de profesional y uno de amateur, pero por esa razón las reglas internacionales dictaron en un congreso el no enfrentamiento de amateur con profesionales.
With Castro's ban on professional boxing in 1961, such fights were obviously forbidden, leaving us speculating as to how Cuba's best would have stacked up against the greatest professionals. Would their style have worked in the pros, or was it simply formed to capitalise on a point-scoring amateur system? Leave your comments down below. Yet with the ban being lifted in June 2022, maybe we'll see a dominant generation of Cuban boxers coming to the limelight. Who really knows? Anyway, thanks for watching guys, please consider liking and subscribing. Cheers.